New Frontiers. Last week, Ellen Davis was here to talk about ecology. I mean, we actually looked back rather than forwards at the new stuff. We looked at the Old Testament and reasons that we are called to care for God's creation, the importance of recognizing climate change and ecology. This week, we'll be talking about the future of warfare. Next week, we'll be talking about extraterrestrials and what life on other planets or solar systems might mean for our faith. And the final week, we'll be talking about life extension and experiments in longevity. So, with that, I introduce you to Professor Amy Laura Hall from Duke, and I'll let you take it from there.
Sure, thank you. And as I said before, because of the filming for people who are at home or somewhere else but not here, I'm going to awkwardly stand before you here for the sake of the videotaping. Usually with a group this size, especially in Sunday school, I would have us sit in a circle. So kind of pretend that that's what we're doing, as instead I'm standing up here in front of you. So thank you so much for the hospitality. Can you hear me okay? All right. So thank you for the hospitality. I have never been in this space before. I've never been on this campus of Chapel of the Cross. I have served as the scholar in residence, which just means being there on Sunday mornings and lecturing at Christ Church Episcopal in Raleigh several times since I moved to North Carolina, but I've never been here, so I did find it. I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful for the invitation. Thank you so much. So I'll tell you a little bit about who I am. First, I'll tell you a joke, because we're near UNC. I feel safe telling this joke here. That when I am at the grocery store or wherever I go, I'm pretty chatty. I'm from West Texas, and people in West Texas, at least some of us, are chatty. And when somebody asks what I do, or I'll say something about being a teacher, and I tell people I teach ethics at Duke, I've had 2 different people since 1999 say the same phrase, "So you spit into the wind." So I don't tell that joke at Duke, but yes, I've had 2 different people that use that exact same joke. "So you spit into the wind." So yes, I teach ethics at Duke, which some people would consider to be spitting into the wind. Another friend who follows Duke football very closely, when he found out that many of the football players and football coaches in the internship program at Duke take courses with me, he said, "Wait, you're teaching them ethics? No wonder we're having trouble. Stop teaching them ethics." So I've been teaching at Duke since 1999. I grew up in West Texas, went off to Emory for my undergraduate, did work in political science, and then eventually went to Yale to do my Master's of Divinity at Yale Divinity School, and then did my PhD in religious studies with a particular emphasis in Christian ethics at Yale in the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences there. So I've been at Duke since I graduated from Yale, and I teach across the university. I teach most of my courses in the Divinity School, but I also, because I teach ethics, I teach in other sectors of the university. So I teach in the Science and Society program. I teach in the Graduate Liberal Studies program. I teach also I've taught through the Duke Focus program, which is for the first semester, first year undergraduates in genetics and also in global health. So my work I do work across the university. One of the emphases at Duke Divinity School when I arrived was teaching on war. That had to do with the fact that 2 of our senior faculty members at that time, Richard Hayes and Stanley Hauerwas, both had an emphasis in their research on war. Both of them are outspoken pacifists. Stanley Hauerwas was on the cover of Time magazine as, what did they call him, America's theologian, best theologian, something like that, in 2001. So he's very well known, and students came, before I came to Duke in 1999, students were already coming to Duke to study war, to study pacifism, but also to study the ethics of war. So when I arrived in 1999, I had with me the influences of a mother who taught me history, and I went to high school in San Angelo, Texas, which has a very large Air Force base. And so I brought with me an emphasis in political science and an interest in the history of warfare. 3 of my 4 grandparents were veterans of World War II. And I arrived at an institution that had an emphasis on research related to war. And in part because of that emphasis, Duke Divinity School attracted many students who are currently in the military. So I have been teaching students who are training for the military chaplaincy for 22 going on 23 years at Duke, and also students who are already serving as chaplains who through the military are given an assignment to complete a second master's in theology. It's called the THM degree at Duke. Also, they can attend other schools, but many of them, in part because North Carolina has so many military bases, we have students who come every year. We have a cohort who comes through to study for their second master's in ethics, in particular in ethics, as military chaplains, and then they are assigned to teach ethics in a military setting. So because of all of that work, I have, over the 22 some odd years now of teaching at Duke, developed my own teaching in the ethics of war, and also in my teaching with undergraduates, I often will bring in history in American studies, looking at what they don't know, to ask them to think about warcraft based out of the United States. And I will give you a story of one occasion where this was very, very clear. So I was teaching in the Science and Society program, which is an undergraduate program, primarily undergraduate. They also have master's students also. It is an interdisciplinary program at Duke University that's not connected to the Divinity School. And I had about 30 some odd students from across many different disciplines, many different majors in the undergraduate population. And the course was called, let's see, what did we call it? Masculinity and Technology. So the course was on masculinity and technology in war, sports, and sex. And maybe that's partly why the course was very well subscribed. But the students in the course were very diverse. But one of the moments where it was really striking to me, we were reading an analysis of popular war films in the United States, and we were talking about the Rambo series. And I was asking them to read closely different movie posters from the Rambo series, and they sort of knew that there was a Rambo series. Most of them knew that. But I asked them to think through this one section of this book we were reading, and I asked them what they thought of the analysis of coverage in the United States of the My Lai massacre. They had no idea what I was talking about. And so then I said, well, the My Lai massacre is the coverage after the news came out about what had happened there. The coverage was similar to the coverage of the torture of prisoners at Abu Ghraib, and they did not know what I was talking about. It was at that point that I thought, okay, I need to continue to teach about war, even in my undergraduate courses. Now, this connects to what I want to talk to you about today, in that students today, what they did was they all pulled out their phones and asked how to spell Abu Ghraib. And I said, no, please do not just look this up on your phones, because I knew what they would come across immediately were images. And I did not give them any kind of warning of what they were about to see. And so I asked them, please, to put away their phones, and then for us to talk through what they would find out if they did that search later. But I wanted them to have some idea. So much of my work, I'm trying to bridge for people information about actual war and what they don't know. So in Christian ethics, one of the ways to teach Christian ethics is to ask people to think about what they see and also what they don't see. So to think about what is being depicted on television, how it is being depicted, and what it is that they find out maybe decades later that they have not seen. At the Divinity School I guess it was about 2002, 2003, in my teaching, I found that most of the students who had some idea of World War II history, of the history of World War II, thought that the United States entered World War II to save the Jewish people from the Holocaust. That was their, thank you. It's helpful when I receive some, even with the mask. It was, so I didn't say, how do you not know this history? I didn't say that, but I started teaching the documentary, The Fog of War, which is a long interview, a very carefully edited interview by the documentarian Errol Morris. And in watching that documentary, and Errol Morris has a very particular style where he uses, there's a name he uses for the kind of camera he uses, where Robert McNamara, you're looking Robert McNamara in the eyes as he is speaking. And I found that one of the things that would happen in class is that students wanted Robert McNamara to give a definitive confession. They were craving for him to say, I'm sorry, I did things that were wrong. And that's not how the documentary works. So then I ended up asking students to think through why, as they were learning the history that many of them didn't know, many of them had never heard LBJ's voice. That was striking to me as a Texan. I was like, how did y'all not know how he sounds? Many of them had never heard his voice. Because in one section, they're playing tapes of LBJ. And I asked them to think through why, as they're learning this history, they're also wanting a confession from this one particular man, and to think through how Errol Morris had evoked that in them, the desire to hear particular words from this one man. And for Episcopalians, I think this is probably a safe place. In the Methodist Church, we almost always are doing corporate confession. And too often we do corporate confession kind of as we're reading the words just to make sure we're staying in tempo with one another, but not necessarily thinking about the words. But in some traditions, there is also individual confession. And so I asked them to think through what service would it serve for you if you heard this one man say he was sorry? What does that mean? And part of, over the years, what I've learned is that they will think through that it's so much to learn about the firebombing of Japan. It is so much to learn about Vietnam that they did not know. And as they're taking it in, it will make them feel perhaps better if they feel like there is this one designated man who will apologize and in some way exculpate for all of us as we're watching the documentary. So in this, as I was thinking through, so I think originally the request was bioethics. Is that right? Something on bioethics? I'm trying to remember. So when you first asked if I would come, I think I was like, oh, you want to hear about Julian of Norwich? That's my latest book, my fourth book, which I brought with me, is on Julian of Norwich. And I figure Episcopalians love Julian of Norwich, which is fun because Methodists mostly don't know who Julian of Norwich even was. But then I think the request was something related to medical ethics, which I do a lot of work in. But as I said, because of my teaching and where I am, the context in which I teach, I've been doing a lot of work on war. And one of the pieces I brought to you is a piece that will be out soon in the Wiley-Blackwell Encyclopedia of Religious Ethics. And I wrote the essay on torture. And so that will be out soon, but I brought the page proofs for you that you're welcome to read. It's my attempt in that piece to explain torture for a curious readership of an encyclopedia of religious ethics. So the field of bioethics and the field of medical ethics intersect. They intersect in a state like North Carolina because we have two of our major industries are war and biotech. And so a lot of the research intersects, and a lot of the questions about what is made, by whom, and why, those questions intersect in North Carolina. And in my writing, I've tried to think through what questions people aren't prompted to ask by mainstream media. And since the Trump administration, I'm hesitant to use the term mainstream media because I've seen like that's become a term that if you're critical of mainstream media, anyway, I'm equal opportunity offensive. My friends who watch Fox News generally are offended by me, and my friends who watch MSNBC generally. So I will probably not please anyone if this setting is anything like most of the settings where I teach. So, but in the mainstream media, what are people prompted to ask and to think are important questions to ask in bioethics? And what are the questions that people don't ask? So in thinking through then what I would talk about in terms of technology, what immediately came to mind in terms of new technology is drone warfare. In 2011, I organized a conference against torture at Duke. And then in I'm trying to remember what year we had it, 2016, 2017, I organized a conference against the use of drones in warfare. And at both of those conferences, not only did military people come to the conference, but they also were main speakers. And in thinking through what questions to ask you to leave with, so you're going to leave with probably more questions than you came with. That's part of how I teach. But one of the questions I want you to think through is what you see in terms of U.S. warcraft, what you don't see, and why, and who sees what. So in 2004, when many people who are civilians, because we've been in a voluntary military, right? So in Vietnam, I'm getting ahead of myself, but in Vietnam, during the Vietnam era, I'll put it that way, and we may have Vietnam veterans in this room or Vietnam veterans who are watching from home. People, if they turned on the news, had footage, had photography, because we have that form of technology. People had televisions, many of them, in their living room, and people together would watch footage on the nightly news. So it was controlled footage, right? It was controlled, but there was footage of what was happening in Vietnam. It was in your living room if you were in the United States and you turned on the news. By the time that we are under the Cheney administration, there is a plethora, there's a myriad of opportunities to learn the news, and also the news is being very carefully controlled, and there are more options for how to control the footage. So if you don't know this history, I'm skimming over things, and I know for some of you, you're thinking, oh, but she's not talking about this or that. There's only so much I can do in the amount of time that I have. But in terms of the embedded journalists, the fact that the journalists were embedded, also the fact that we had a volunteer army instead of a draft at that time, what I was finding was my military they're not mine, but students in my course who were military chaplains were saying, people have no idea what's happening over there. And because they have no idea what's happening over there, we are not getting the support we need. We are not getting the supplies we need. And they were asking me in my classes to ask people to find out more. And many of them knew about the torture of detainees because they were hearing from one another, but people in the civilian population did not know. But in 2004, we then did know through publications like the New York Times, also the Washington Post, and then later in 2010, and this is very contentious, but I'm going to bring it up, through Chelsea Manning's deposit of all of these classified materials, people in the civilian population then knew even more than they had through the investigations that were done primarily through Amnesty International. But so from 2004 to 2010, you have people who thought we were watching the news, people in the civilian population who thought we were watching the news and reading the news about what was happening in Iraq and Afghanistan. But people in the military population knew that we did not know things, knew the civilian population did not know things. And also, because of the demographics of a volunteer army, volunteer military, sorry. My Army friends love it when I say Army for all of the military branches, but all of my other friends in the other branches don't like it. So sorry, I apologize. I recognize there are different branches. People in the military have been disproportionately people who grew up poor, people who needed the opportunity to go to college, so they joined through ROTC. I have many, many friends' children from San Angelo who did exactly that, and also people who are African American or Latino. So the number of people who know the stories from someone telling them from being in the military has shrunk with the volunteer army. So thinking about who knows what, which demographics know what, which people will hear firsthand from someone else what is happening. These questions, I think, are crucial for thinking about technology, visual technology, audio technology, who knows what, and how information is disseminated. So WikiLeaks couldn't have happened without all of these different forms of technology. And the journalism today, journalists are trying to sort through how to deal with footage that people are providing and trying to sort out. As if you follow the news, you know this, that people are trying to sort out how to detect what is real footage and what is not. But in terms of real footage in 2004, how am I doing on time? Okay, so this opening paragraph of an article by Susan Sontag, this was May 23rd, 2004, in the New York Times Magazine. I also brought an article from, I think it was also 2004, by Seymour Hersh, that was in, I believe that's the New Yorker. I believe his publication was in the New Yorker. This is the first paragraph of Susan Sontag's piece in 2004. For a long time, at least 6 decades, photographs have laid down the tracks of how important conflicts are judged and remembered. So photographs being a particular form of technology. Are you tracking me? Am I making sense? You may not agree. I don't expect you all to agree with me, but I'm hoping I'm making sense. Okay. All right, so for a long time, at least 6 decades, photographs have laid down the tracks of how important conflicts are judged and remembered. The Western Memory Museum, I thought that was an interesting phrase, the Western Memory Museum is now mostly a visual one. Photographs have an insuperable, is that how you pronounce that word? I think that's insuperable, power to determine what we recall of events. And it now seems probable that the defining association of people everywhere with the war that the United States launched preemptively in Iraq last year will be photographs of the torture of Iraqi prisoners by Americans in the most infamous of Saddam Hussein's prisons, Abu Ghraib. So I asked students to do close readings of images and also of words. I'm going to point out some of the words that Susan Sontag has chosen to use in this first paragraph in the New York Times Magazine. This is right after the images have become available and the news has become available in 2004. So in 6 decades, photographs have laid down the tracks of how important conflicts are judged and remembered. So photographs have become, she's suggesting, how people think about a particular war. So there will be what the word maybe I would use is iconic photographs. So war photography being a crucial way that people visualize and remember war. And she uses the term the Western Memory Museum. And here she's not naming a particular institution, right? She's naming how we, and this is very risky in journalism to use the first person plural. I thought it was interesting that she used it here. How we, the Western Memory Museum is now mostly visual one. Photographs have the power to determine what we recall of events. Now, if you're a veteran, it's not, an iconic photograph is not going to be what has laid down the tracks of your memory, right? She's speaking to a civilian audience mostly here, I think. We recall of events and the defining association of people everywhere. I thought that was also interesting. She's talking to a particular audience in the New York Times Magazine. Photographs of the torture of Iraqi prisoners by Americans in the most infamous of Saddam Hussein's prisons. She's doing a lot in this one paragraph. But I want you to think about the imagery she's using of seeing and memory and photography as we then think about who is seeing what in drone warfare. So I'm going to awkwardly just ask you, did most of you get a chance to read the piece from the New York Times? It's okay if you didn't. It's not homework. Okay, no. All right. Then let me introduce this piece. So when in 2000, sorry, my allergies are so bad. Also, I'm feeling self-conscious. The print, I have to apologize to you, you're wearing white pants. The print from the things that I've given y'all, just be forewarned. I think, do I have black smudges on my face? So I'm seeing fingerprints all over the white page that I brought, and I think the printer has left quite a residue on here. So in 2010, when the materials that Chelsea Manning, if you do a search online for this, you might go ahead and use the name that Chelsea Manning was known by then, which was Bradley Manning. So in 2010, when there was increasing coverage, the Guardian drew off the materials that were then available about the war. Also the New York Times, I think, eventually did, the Washington Post. The Guardian, I think, is maybe the best place to look if you're looking for which source to go to. But in 2010, when this happened, one of the things I was finding was that many people were not reading the news. Maybe it was just we were all dealing with whatever it was we were dealing with at the time. But I knew from people who I was teaching who were in the military, it was really important to pay attention to the news that we had not been privy to as civilians. So one of the things we did, there was a group of us, ministers, ethicists, put forward a call for people to read the news, read these articles that were coming out in 2010 about things, civilian casualties, also in terms of the lack of equipment, which equipment was missing, these kinds of pieces of information that were classified, but that then were available. We were asking people ministers, to read the news and at least to talk about the news, not necessarily from the pulpit, but at least be having conversations with people in their congregations. And we called that the Proper 29 Project because that was the week that things came out. We were asking people to talk about it on the Sunday that was by the liturgical year Proper 29. Because of that piece, because of that effort, the National Religious Campaign Against Torture asked me to organize a conference against torture. In 2010, when I was organizing a conference against torture, the way one of my students put it was we were asking people to put their eyeballs on things that they did not want to see. We were asking people to look at information that they didn't want to look at. What we all found, as we were organizing this conference, which included a brigadier general, Stephen Xenakis, who was asking people to think about what it does to military personnel to be asked to participate in what the New York Times at the time was calling enhanced interrogation, to ask so this brigadier general was asking people, civilians, to think through what we were asking people to do. But at that time, at least the mainstream media had been covering then for about 6 years, the torture of prisoners in Abu Ghraib. By the time we were organizing it was really this time a solo effort, organizing a conference against the use of drones in warfare, I found that most people I was talking to who were in the civilian population did not even know we had this program within the United States. So the United States has had a program for assassination for a long time, right? We even civilians will know that the United States has an assassination program. In our larger military efforts, we also assassinate people. You all know that, right? So we know that, but part of what we have not paid attention to as civilians is the vast increase in the number of people who are related somehow to the military effort. Some of them are contract employees who do not even receive military benefits afterwards. But how many people have been involved in this form of an assassination program? So as I was organizing that conference, one of the things I learned was that civilian people did not even know what we were asking people who were working in some way with the military to see. People were not even seeing what people were being told to see as they were working in the U.S. drone program. Is this making sense? So military people, I mean, goodness, the Air Force absolutely knew that there was a growth in this program because they were trying to figure out how to recruit people who had seen Top Gun, right? Maybe they didn't have, maybe that's generational. I don't know. What would they have seen that would be the younger generation's version of Top Gun? Maybe it's probably video games, isn't it? It's video games. Call of Duty. Yeah, it would be video games. No, that's true. Okay, so thank you. Thinking about seeing and what we see and how we see it, for the younger generation, they've been seeing war through, not all of them, of course. Some of them are not doing that, but many of them, girls and boys, have been, playing video games for war. So the Air Force has been trying to figure out how to recruit people into the Air Force who are thinking that they're going to be flying a plane. And that is part of what this piece that I suggested you read talks about, is how people who signed up to be part of the Air Force then found that their opportunity to serve was in the U.S. drone program. And many civilians have not been privy to that information. And what General Sinakis was saying at the Conference Against Torture in 2011 was when the actual conference was. What he was saying in 2011 in terms of people not thinking through, people who aren't in the military, not having to think through what cost, what toll it was taking on people in the military to participate in the work of torture. Then when it came time to talk to people about the U.S. drone program, that was what people in the military were saying that we needed to make sure we talked about at this conference, was the toll it was taking on people who were working in the drone program. And there have been many pieces many journalistic pieces in German newspapers, in Spanish newspapers, in Italian newspapers, but in the United States, there have been fewer pieces about the U.S. drone program. So when I saw that this came out in the New York Times, I was grateful, because I thought possibly that this church might read the New York Times. And so I thought it might possibly be that people, people who are, I realize I need to look at the camera periodically. They're reading the New York Times right now. So I thought it's a useful piece, even though there was nothing in here that I didn't know, but it's a well-written piece in terms of pulling someone in who does not already know what has been happening. Yes, and I am happy to start with questions.
There's been two films in the last few years that portray this really well. One was called Eye in the Sky.
Do you mind speaking into the microphone, just so people also at home, and also, I hope y'all can hear.
Titles are escaping me, but one was called Eye in the Sky that portrayed just the experience of that drone pilot having to execute a strike and just sort of his personal struggle with that. There was another film with Ethan Hawke that was sort of the cognitive dissonance he experienced with, like, he would drop his daughter off at soccer practice and then he would get in his car and go to the base and execute strikes and watch people die and then get in his car and go home for dinner. And it was this really sort of odd experience. There was a play in the last few years too.
Yes.
That was dealt with this issue. So
yes.
It's been addressed in place really well.
So. Thank you so much. Yes, and I'm forgetting the name of the play, but thank you so much. It's interesting in terms of. Okay, give me a minute. I'm thinking while I'm talking. Okay, that's risky to do, but. One of the things we found as we were working on this torture conference was there were people who had been watching torture, but they were watching torture on the show 24. So there were, we thought we were asking people to look at things they didn't want to see, and in the midst of planning that conference, one of the things we had to reckon with was that since after 9/11, the depiction of torture in police procedurals and in other popular forms of media rose exponentially. It's really striking. I think I talk about that in the encyclopedia article that I brought to you. So people were watching torture be effective, and people in the military will tell you it's not effective. People in the police force will tell you it's not effective. But they were watching this, what one of my friends calls Scooby-Doo for grown-ups. It was like the show 24 was that formulaic. Have some of you watched the show? It was, I think, for some people, I had people describe it to me as soothing, that it was soothing. They would catch a bad guy, the bad guy would, and sometimes bad girl would be would be tortured, and then they would be able to save people, all within a 24-hour, the clock ticking. So it was in some way cathartic, therapeutic, but people in the military would tell you it was, I almost just used a bad word, bull poop. People in the military would tell you it's bull poop. The show that people have most referenced when I've asked people to think about drone warfare in American popular media is the show that was, I think it was the same creator who created 24, who created Homeland. Am I remembering that? Do y'all remember that show with Claire Danes? It's Claire Danes, right, who played the lead? So with 24, you had Kiefer Sutherland. Think about who we see. And so Kiefer Sutherland, who was my generation's heartthrob, blonde heartthrob. And so we watched Kiefer Sutherland do this thing that many people wanted to watch done. And then with Homeland, we watched Claire Danes, who was sort of the next generation's blonde heartthrob in a program of drone warfare. So yeah, that's one of the questions I would ask you to leave with, is think also about how, when drone warfare has been depicted, has it been depicted with some accuracy? And that's in this piece that, again, we brought hard copies of it that you can look at. Part of what they're naming is the exponential growth of this program and how many people are involved in the U.S. drone program. And as you said, they have to watch their target many times over the course of a long period of time, weeks, sometimes months, going about their everyday lives. As one of the people who came and spoke, she was basically a whistleblower about the U.S. drone program. As a woman. The unseen scars of the remote-controlled kill. Okay, more questions. I'll stop.
Expand a little bit about on the use of the word assassinate in the context of the drone program?
Absolutely. So,
I ask you to use this microphone just this second, for whatever reason, the lavalier, we can hear you, but the live stream cannot. Just now.
okay.
I'll let you switch to.
Okay.
Yes. So again, the question was, can you say more about the word assassin?
Well, there's so many different ways, I suppose, that you could go, but I'd just like for you to expand and hear your thoughts about the use of the word assassinate in the context of the drone program. Just elaborate.
So I want to look at the Oxford English Dictionary for the etymology of the word assassinate. There's some homework to take home. But I don't use that term lightly. I hope that didn't come across as cavalier. But that is a term that I first heard used by someone who was a former drone, who was working with the drone program. That some of the words that people will use when they're defending, and it's often not people in the military, it's people who are engineers who are working on the drone technology, will talk about precision, target, precision, surgical. These are some of the words that people will use. So by assassinate, I mean a program where someone has been designated by name, locale, in particular to be a target for killing. So it's usually been someone who is deemed to be, what would be the term? Deemed to be, what is one of the terms they use here? In the piece that just came out, let's see, high value target. High value target. So someone who's deemed to be somebody who, if they are killed, it will, I mean, often strategically it's to eliminate someone, kill someone whose death will lower morale, right? Whose death will in some way, will send a signal. And that, by the way, is the only way torture is effective, is if what you're wanting to do is scare people in a region and cow them. Torture is effective for that. If you torture people and then put them back out in the population and they tell stories, they tell what's happened to them, that is one. Torture is effective for that, to scare people. But in terms of drone warfare, that's what I mean, is when a high-value target, which is a person, a high-value target, it has is singled out as potentially a useful person to kill for the overall aims of a particular region at a particular time. Is that making sense? Does that help? But am I getting at what you were wanting to ask?
How important is it that the target be named? You know, be a person who is, who is known by name. Because there are many times that you could probably check off many of the boxes that you just, just mentioned, without necessarily, being able to put a name on the target. There could be a high value, a probability that that there were high value targets, let's say, in a particular location. I'm just curious, in the context of your research in ethics, what the use of the word or what the criteria, the being able to name the target, how that comes into play. Well, I don't have any. There's no value judgment in this question. I'm more interested in hearing what and I'm sure my brethren here will feel the same. In terms of, you mentioned name as part of the way you understood assassination.
Yes,
Yeah.
That someone has been, that a group of, and this, when I'm uncomfortable, I speak in passive voice. I don't know if anybody else has that problem. But when I'm talking about something that's really difficult, I have to make myself use active voice. There are people with names who decide which people with names will be designated. There are people with names who will designate other people with names who will be high-value targets. Yes. I don't have a simple, you're not asking for a simple answer, but I don't have a very precise answer for that. What I have heard from people who've worked in the drone program is significant to them is not necessarily so much the name as it is the intimate details that they are seeing as they are watching someone who they've been told is going to be a potential target in the future. Now, one of the reasons why names would be important, just in terms of thinking through how the drone program works, is that sometimes they get the wrong person, right? Sometimes they get somebody who's a different name. And what has that done? The film that I recommend on the effects of drone warfare on a region, so this is shifting the frame to people who are living under drone warfare, is the woman's name is Madiha Tahir, Tahir, and her film is called The Wounds of Waziristan. It's about 30 minutes long. I can send a link. But Madiha Tahir is a war journalist who went to this one region that has been a region that various different militaries have used. Various different militaries have been a part of efforts to shift things geopolitically in this one area called Waziristan, and she goes there. And one of the things that she does is try to give people the chance to speak about loved ones by name and show their photographs of people that they have lost. Listen to my language. I'm really using euphemistic language here. But people who've been killed through the U.S. drone program. So if you want to look on the other side, one of the things Madiha said when she came to Duke to speak is that it is difficult to get people to persuade people to view a documentary unless it has someone who looks potentially like they could be a Hollywood star in the documentary. And she didn't name Jeremy Scahill by name, but I was like, you mean Jeremy Scahill? If you don't know who he is, he's very aesthetically normative. He's a very aesthetically normative man who has been kind of the designated journalist who people will watch because he's aesthetically normative. But one of the things she named was it's hard to get people to watch a documentary unless there is going to be a potential superhero who can go in as the war journalist and look like they could save the day. I thought it was an interesting commentary on how people want. It seems that many viewers want a guide who will look a particular way. It makes it more somehow palatable. I don't know, viewable. I need a visual metaphor instead of a oral metaphor.
If you haven't read the New York Times article that was handed out, it is so good. And one thing that surprised me, I thought with precision drones, surgical drones, there was going to be a certain anonymity to it. I thought it was going to be easier to kill people without knowing who they were because you weren't face to face with muskets. You were far away. And what this article shows is what you said, how intimate the relationship with the drone target becomes, and the lack of support that some of, I wish you had been here earlier. A military chaplain has arrived. Yes, it's really well worth a read. We're at the end of our hour, but if there's a last question. We are so grateful. You said we would leave with more questions than were answered, and I think you have delivered. Thank you. Thank you.